All right, so last time we dealt with making a request. We made what was called an asynchronous request to our rocket launch page. And the idea behind an asynchronous request was if we use this XML HTTP request, we could get data from a third-party site, from a third-party server, using their API that they provided for us, without having to reload our page. So our page would render, our page would interact with our user. Behind the scenes, the server is getting information from the rocket launch or from whatever third-party site we're utilizing. When the data is received, without locking up our web page, the DOM gets updated with the information that we received from that request. And we did that using that XML HTTP request objects. And we wrapped up, we had a lot of code we had to work with. We had to wrap up that request, and we did it in a GET request. We used the URL that was provided. We had to send that HTTP request. Then we had to wait for information from the server. And there was a couple of pieces of information we needed to know from the server before we knew we had data that was valid. We had to wait for the ready state, whether it's 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So when we got a ready state 4, that indicated that the server was done sending information to us. And then we also needed the status because we needed to know server sent us information, but was it what we wanted? Was the information found, or was it maybe a 404 or maybe a database issue? So we wanted to know that, yes, we have received the final response from the server and that the status was A-OK, or 200 in that case. Once we got that information and we verified that what we have is ready to rock, then we had to get the response text. We knew that it was in JSON format, so we had to parse that JSON into a JavaScript object so that we could get at the individual pieces and update our DOM. Whew, that was a lot of work. So today I'm going to introduce you to something that's going to make that job much easier, and that's called Axios. All right, so take a little trip with me to this GitHub site repository called Axios, and you can do a search for it. But here is where all of the code, it's open source code, so people can work on it to perfect it and make it wonderful. What is Axios? Axios, let me scroll down and see if it gives me some information. It looks like it will make XML HTTP requests from the browser. Fantastic. I know what that is. I've been looking for that. It supports a promise API. I don't understand what that is, but I'm guessing you're going to explain it to I am. I'm going to get to that very shortly. Oh, thank goodness. I promise. Get it? Never mind. Anyway, it looks like it also automatically transformed the JSON data. So maybe it's going to take care of that parsing for me, so I don't need to worry about that. That would be fairly cool. All right. So let me scroll down just a little bit further, because it turns out in order to use this code, I need to provide a CDN link to the source code so that I can access code that was already written for me on my behalf, so I don't have to go through all of this laborious crap. That's really what it was. But it was good for you so you understood what was happening underneath the hood. So now let's get rid of all the code that was very verbose and difficult to write, but we understand now its purpose. And let's see, first of all, we're going to go into our indexed HTML and paste in. Apparently I did not paste that in properly, so let's do that again. Copy, paste, there we go. I'm going to paste in that Axios CDN, so that way I have access, A-C-C-E-S-S, to Axios, A-X-I-O-S. Whew. All right, so how is this going to work? Let's see. First of all, I'm going to create a function, and this is going to be all my launch data. And as I always do in the beginning, I'm just going to do an alert box just to make sure that I'm linked up successfully. Alert, hello. And then I'm going to launch data, call it, and I just want to make sure that it's working before I move on. All right, super. Apparently, I am hooked up correctly to my JavaScript page, and I've got a function that's ready to go. And so now, here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to access Axios. And so we use the word Axios, and I'm going to use a get method, which is going to do exactly like you might suggest or guess. It's going to create a GET request using the URL that we have already become acquainted with in the launches API. So I'm going to copy that get request URL into this method's arguments. All right. And so how does a promise work? What is a promise? All right. I promise at first this is a little bit confusing, but it hopefully will make sense as we progress. The idea behind a promise, if we are told that we are going to receive a promise back from a function call, which is what we're doing with Axios, we're receiving a promise back. What we're getting back from, what we're promised to get back from that data is we're going to get either data that was successful, in other words, similar to our status 200, or if it's an error, like if it was the data couldn't be found or something like that, we're told that we can use this .catch. So a promise is, I promise that I'm going to send you back either a payload that you requested that you can access using this .then notation, or if you're concerned about catching the error, you can also use this .catch, and I promise you that I will send an error and you can catch it using this notation, this syntax. All right, so we're just going to deal with the then portion. And so we're going to follow that notation. And the idea then is we're going to make this function call. So this is going to do that whole part for us. It's going to wrap the data up as a GET request. It's going to send the URL. It's going to wait for the payload to get returned. And then, pun intended, if we have success, once we receive the 4 and the status code 200, then we can proceed with, and I'm going to do an anonymous function. Let me just type this all out because I can't talk and do it at the same time. Response. Okay, so in 1, 2, 3 lines of code, we have done all of that code that we saw before. Let me just remind you what that looks like. I'm just going to put it back in here as a quick review. So in 3 lines of code using Axios, we have created the XML HTTP request. We have packaged up the GET request and the API. We've sent it. We are waiting for the ready state change, and utilizing the .then, we are waiting for that status code 200. And so now this open and closing curly braces are, okay, what do you want to do with that? Because the data is already parsed up for us, that's what it said, I don't even have to do this JSON parse. In other words, let me get rid of all of this so I don't have extraneous stuff going on. Let's do this. Response then is what we got back from the Axios API call. So out of curiosity, let's do a console log and see what we actually got back. Console log response. And so now when we refresh our page and look at our console log, what we see is that we didn't get JSON back. We actually got JSON back that got converted into the object for us. So it did all of that. You can see that we got an XML HTTP request. So that was all sent for us. We have a ready state 4. Oops, where did that go? Ready state 4. And I think if we scroll down here, there's the payload. There's our status code 200. So we can see there's our status code 200. So we can see all of that was taken care of for us. So how do we then get at the data that we need? Well, I guess that was kind of a trick question. So, no, it wasn't. So if I look at the code that I got returned and I start drilling down with some of the arrows, looks like I've got an object called data. So in data, count 5. So I have 5 launches, and each of those launches looks like I have an array of launches that I can get at. So let's do this out of curiosity. Let's keep drilling down. So let's console log the data. And now I have an object with 5 items in it. So if I get at launches 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's see what happens when I do launches. So I'm just drilling down through the data. Now I've got an array with 5 items in it. So from here, that's pretty straightforward, right? So if I put those array, let's see, array launches, and I do equals response.data.launches. Now I have an array of those launches in my hand, and then I can do for var I equals 0. This should look familiar by now. Less than array launches length I plus plus and console.log array launches of I. Let's see what that gives us. Oh, array of I, right? That makes sense. Okay. So now I've got the arrays. Let's comment out this so I make sure I get what I'm expecting. Okay. So now I've got a hold of the arrays themselves. So each one is doing an array. And now I can type out, maybe I can do the name. Name. And maybe I can also do, I started off at the beginning with a console.window start, I think was one of them. All right, I think I have to spell window start correctly. All right, there we go. All right, so with much less code, using someone else's work, I have successfully and much more quickly created that asynchronous call using Axios, and then via a promise, which does all of the error checking for me. I can utilize the .then notation, which is successfully looking for that ready state 4 and status code 200. And then in here, I get the same kind of data that I had before. So much easier than using the XML HTTP request object, but at the same time, getting the information that we need.